The story begins with two parallel events that at first glance are not connected in any way. The first is the disappearance of a 17-year-old girl named Emily. She was a student at a local school, and her boyfriend, Zach, was the last person to see her alive. The second is the strange rumors about the old school wing, where, according to the locals, something is wrong. Emily went missing a month ago, and the police still haven't made any progress in their investigation. Her mother, Sarah, sounded the alarm, printed flyers, beat the thresholds of all possible instances. But gradually the attention to the case weakened. The mother, wrapped in pain, was left alone with questions that no one could answer. Zach, on the other hand, showed almost no emotion. He became withdrawn, avoided talking about the missing girl, and even talked less and less with friends. No one knew what was going on in his head, but his behavior suggested strange thoughts. Meanwhile, a group of teenagers from the same school decided to check out the old wing of the building. It was closed 10 years ago after a series of unexplained accidents. It was said that the walls there were saturated with fear and pain. But who would believe that? It was a challenge for teenagers, a great place to test their courage. For brave souls, Liam, Cassie, Jordan and Nick gathered late at night at the side entrance to the school. Liam broke open the old lock and they went in. They took their phones, a couple of flashlights and some snacks with them, as if it was just another outing. The air inside the building was stagnant, smelled musty and damp. The corridors of the old wing were practically destroyed, the walls were cracked, the ceiling had collapsed in some places, and the floor was covered with a thick layer of dust. But the main thing that immediately caught my eye was graffiti. There were strange symbols and phrases painted all over the walls, which seemed to have been left in a hurry. Just don't look out the windows. Shadows come to life. They're watching. Cassie took a picture of one of the inscriptions and jokingly said, "Maybe this is an art project of some former student." But when they reached the end of the corridor, their jokes ended. There was an old bulletin board with old photos of students and a list of missing children on it. All these people disappeared from the school at different times, but one thing they had in common was that they were all connected to this wing. "Hey, do you see this too?" Jordan whispered, pointing to one of the photos. "It's Emily." Her face was indeed in one of the photos. It was not a school card, but a strange, like an amateur photo. It showed her standing in the hallway of this very wing, and her eyes seemed completely empty. "This isn't funny anymore," Cassie muttered, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. At that moment, a thud sounded from the back of the building. Nick picked up the flashlight and pointed it in the direction of the sound, but saw nothing. "It's time to get out of here," Liam said firmly. But when they tried to go back, they found that the door they had entered through was locked. All their efforts to open it were in vain. "Did one of us close it?" Nick asked. "You mean there's someone else here?" Jordan replied, peering intently into the darkness. Suddenly, another oddity caught their attention. There was an inscription on one of the doors to the classrooms, "Open if you want to know the truth." "It's some kind of trap," Cassie said, but her voice was shaking. Liam, ignoring the protests, pushed open the door. There was only one thing inside the classroom, a video camera that stood on the old teacher's desk. Liam turned it on and started watching the recordings. There were shots on the screen of Emily sitting at her desk, looking around in fright. Her lips were moving, as if she was repeating something by heart. In the next frame, Zach appeared. He stood behind her with a stony expression on his face, and then, "Damn it, turn it off." Cassie screamed as the recording suddenly ended with a loud scream. But the camera didn't turn off. She continued to work, although all the records on her disappeared. A new inscription appeared on the screen, "He brought her here." "Who did this?" Jordan shouted. Their screams echoed through the empty corridors. Somewhere in the distance, there was a noise, as if someone had fallen. Nick grabbed a flashlight and ran in that direction, but suddenly stumbled. What the? He bent down and saw a note on the floor. Her text was clumsy, written in a hurry. He made me. I'm sorry. Cassie lit up the note and noticed bloodstains on the edges of the paper. This. It's her handwriting, she whispered, grabbing Liam's hand. The continuation of events became more and more frightening. The sounds grew closer, the doors slammed shut of their own accord, and there was a loud banging from the windows, as if someone was hitting them from inside. The whole group felt trapped in a trap that could not be understood or explained. And somewhere in the depths of the school, where the darkest corridors began, they heard a familiar voice. It was Zach's voice. Emily, you know I didn't want this. The silence his voice was sinking into seemed to be the most terrifying part of what was happening. We have to go there, Liam said suddenly, although it was clear that he was as scared as the others. Are you out of your mind? We actually want to get out, not. Cassie began, but was interrupted by a sharp screech of metal. They turned to the sound. The door that led deep into the school slowly opened by itself. A faint light could be seen through the crack in the doorway. Emily might be there, Liam said, barely able to keep the tremor out of his voice. If she's alive, we have to try. This is suicide. Nick was on the verge of panic. Don't you see? There's something wrong here. But no one moved. Liam looked at his friends, and despite their protests, he stepped through the door that opened. Cassie, Jordan, and Nick reluctantly followed him. The thin light they saw from the hallway came from an old TV set on the floor. The screen was flickering, and the same recording was playing over and over again. It was Emily. She was sitting in the corner of the room, hugging her knees with her hands. Her face was pale, with large bruises under her eyes, and words were silently coming out of her lips. Cassie approached the TV, listening. She realized that Emily was repeating the same thing. He knows. He knows. He knows. Who knows? Cassie whispered, though the answer was unclear. Suddenly, the screen went blank, leaving the room in pitch darkness. At that moment, a loud knock sounded behind them. They turned around, but saw no one. It's a dead end, Jordan said in a strangled voice. But Liam wasn't going to stop. He fumbled for the door handle and yanked it open. Emily's belongings lay on the floor of the next room, a torn backpack, a torn jacket and a notebook. Liam picked it up and opened it. Most of the pages were filled with the same phrases. Zach is not who he seems. I saw what he did. He won't stop. The last entry was different from the others. It was shorter and looked like a request for help. If you're reading this, save me. But be careful. You don't know what he's capable of. At that moment, a sharp sound came from the next room, Zach's voice. You won't find her anyway. No one will find it. The friends rushed towards the exit, but the corridors were completely different now. It seemed that the school had turned into a maze. The doors they had passed through earlier now led to completely different rooms. The walls seemed to move by themselves. Cassie burst into tears, realizing that they might never get out of here. Nick grabbed her arm and screamed. We'll get out. Just stick together. But no one knew that a figure was watching them in the depths of the corridor. Her face was indistinguishable in the darkness, but the sound of heavy footsteps made everyone freeze. Is that him? Cassie whispered, afraid to turn around. Don't stop. Liam shouted, pulling everyone after him. But the figure was already moving faster, her footsteps getting louder. Each of them felt that something would inevitably come closer if they slowed down even for a second. Somewhere in the distance, Zach's voice sounded again. You all chose the wrong path. The friends ran, stumbling and clinging to the wreckage, trying to find some kind of salvation. The sound of the pursuers' footsteps was getting closer. Their pulse was pounding in their ears, fear was squeezing their chests, and each of them realized that there might be no way out. Liam was the first to notice the light from around the corner. He rushed there, dragging the others with him. There was a large gym in the hallway around the corner. Old basketball hoops hung from the collapsed ceiling, and the floor was strewn with debris. There was a man standing in the center of the room. Zach. He was holding what looked like a long metal rod in his hands. His eyes were empty, and his face was frozen in a grim smile. "I knew you would come," he said in a calm, almost peaceful voice. "You're always looking for the truth. But are you ready for her to destroy you?" "Zach, what did you do to Emily?" Liam shouted, struggling to control his panic. Zach didn't answer. Instead, he slowly raised his hand and pointed to the corner of the gym. There was something under the old netting. Liam took a step forward, but Cassie grabbed his arm. "Don't go there," she whispered. "I have to know." Liam barked and pulled away. He came closer and saw that it was Emily. Her body. It was wrapped in an old curtain, and her face was frozen in horror. The note was still clutched in the girl's hand. Liam pulled it out with shaking fingers and read it. He said he loves me. But it was a lie. He's not human. He's... The note was torn off, and the blood on its edges made the text almost indistinguishable. "What did you do?" Liam turned to Zach, his voice cracking with rage. "She deserved it," Zach replied indifferently. "Just like you." Zach took a step forward and then froze. Suddenly, the lights went out in the gym. There was complete darkness, broken only by sounds, heavy breathing, rustling and banging, as if someone was moving around. "Who's here?" Cassie screamed, trying to turn on the flashlight, but it refused to work. Emily's voice was heard in the darkness. Quiet, brittle. "You shouldn't have come here." Liam froze. My heart stopped beating. His hands were clenched into fists, but he couldn't figure out where the voice was coming from. "Emily? Are you alive?" "What is it?" he asked, peering into the darkness. But the only answer was a shrill scream that tore through the air. At that moment, the friends felt someone or something running past them. Panic overwhelmed everyone. Someone grabbed Cassie's shoulder and she screamed, but when she turned around, there was no one there. Nick was muttering incoherently, trying to find a way out, but all the gym doors were closed. Meanwhile, Zach disappeared. He was neither seen nor heard. "We can't stay here," Liam shouted, groping for the wall in an attempt to find something. But the darkness seemed to consume them. Footsteps, rustles, and muffled moans surrounded them from all sides. At that moment, Zach's voice rang out from behind one of the corners again. "You'll never get out of here." And then, the door at the far end of the gym burst open. There was a bright light behind it. Without hesitation, everyone rushed there. Liam ran first, shouting for everyone to stay behind him. But as soon as they crossed the threshold, the light disappeared. They found themselves in a new corridor. The same musty smell, the same cracked walls, and only one inscription on the floor. "You chose the wrong path." Liam looked around, gasping for air. The walls around seemed endless, and even the friends standing nearby seemed distant, as if space had warped. "This... a trap?" Nick asked, his voice trembling with fear. "No, it's not just a trap," Cassie replied, peering at the inscription. "It's a game. And we are a part of it." "What kind of game?" Jordan shouted, clutching his head. "We have to get out before he finds us." "Hush." Liam held up his hand, trying to focus. "If this is a game, then there are rules. And there's definitely a way to win." But before anyone could answer, the ceiling of the corridor cracked and dust fell from above. The whole building seemed to start moving, as if some giant was going to crush them in his fist. "Let's run!" Liam shouted, dragging everyone with him. They raced down a corridor that seemed endless. Doors flashed to the left and right, but they were all locked. The friends didn't know where they were going, but they couldn't stop. Finally, they reached the end. In front of them was a massive steel door with a digital lock. A screen glowed on its surface, on which the words were written. "Coming out requires sacrifice. Which one of you is worthy of freedom? What kind of nonsense is this?" Cassie whispered, peering at the screen. This must be some kind of test," Liam mused. "We have to choose something. We don't have to do anything." Nick shouted, banging on the door with his fist. "We'll all go out together, or no one." But at that moment, the screen changed again. Now there are photos on it, the faces of all four. There was an inscription under each photo: "Choose." Cassie took a step back, her eyes wide with horror. "They want us to sacrifice someone? This is crazy." Nick continued to knock uselessly on the door. "We'll find another way out." "There's no time," Liam said quietly, pointing to a small timer in the corner of the screen. 59 seconds. 58, 57. "Liam, don't you dare!" Cassie shouted, realizing what he was thinking. "Someone has to do it," he replied, trying to stay calm. "Otherwise we will all die. We'll find another way out." Nick tried to protest again, but it was too late. The timer was rapidly decreasing. Liam pursed his lips and, without waiting for consent, clicked on his own photo. The screen blinked and the door began to slowly open. "Liam! What did you do?" Cassie screamed in horror. "It's the only way," he replied, looking into her eyes. "Go away. Live." But as soon as the door swung open, they heard raucous laughter coming from everywhere. It was Zach. "Did you really think this was the end?" At the same moment, the floor caved in under Liam's feet. His friends only had time to shout his name before he disappeared into the darkness. The door closed behind them, leaving the remaining three in front of the exit. Cassie, Nick, and Jordan froze. They could have left. But could they leave a friend? "What should we do?" Cassie whispered, looking at the dark doorway where Liam had just stood. Cassie took a deep breath, her hands shaking. She was looking at the door, which had closed again, leaving them outside. Nick grabbed her by the shoulders and, almost shaking her, said, "We can't leave him there. But how do we get him back?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This man, Zach. He arranged it all. It's all his game. We need to understand why." Jordan looked around the hallway, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Debris fell from the wooden beams, exposing old electrical wiring. He picked up a piece of metal from the floor and carefully checked one of the doors. "There may be clues here. We won't get out if we don't figure out what it all means." Cassie wanted to object, but noticed a strange stain on the wall. It looked like a faded inscription. She came closer and ran her fingers over the plaster, exposing the text. "They knew. They always knew. But you have to remember, this is not an accident." "What does this mean?" she muttered, showing the inscription to the others. "Who are they?" Nick frowned. "School? Teachers? This. It's crazy." Jordan squinted at the text. "This is not just nonsense. This is the key." They continued to move along the corridor, carefully examining everything around them. After a few minutes, they went out into a large room that looked like an archive. The shelves stretched to the ceiling, and each was lined with folders and boxes. "Damn, there's decades of information here," Nick breathed. Cassie noticed something strange. One of the shelves was covered with a thick layer of dust, except for a few boxes that looked like they had recently been touched. She pulled one of the boxes, and a folder with the inscription, "Experimental Group," fell out of it. 1987-inch. "Look," she said, opening the folder. There were old photos and documents inside. She noticed a familiar face in one of the photos. "This is Zach," she breathed out. "But it's impossible." The photo showed a teenager in a school uniform surrounded by other students. At the bottom was the caption, "Object Z15. Surveillance has begun. The test continues." "A test?" Nick grabbed the document, trying to read on. The text was dry and scientific, describing some experiments on a group of students who were used to study the human psyche in conditions of isolation and stress. "This is a school," Jordan muttered. "They did it here. They were doing experiments. And Zach was a part of it," Cassie finished. "But why is he still here?" Nick shook his head. "Maybe he survived. Maybe he's crazy. Or—" "Stop," Cassie interrupted, pointing to the text. "It says here that Group Z has been taken out of control. They were unable to complete the experiment." "So he ran away?" Jordan asked. "Or stayed here," she replied softly. At that moment, a strange grinding noise was heard in the room. Nick turned around, grabbing the nearest metal pipe. "Who's here?" But instead of answering, a boy of about 10 years old came out from behind the shelves. His clothes were dirty and his face was covered with dust. "Have you come for the truth?" "What is it?" he asked in a low voice. "Who are you?" Cassie asked warily. "They took me here." "Just like you," the boy said, avoiding their gazes. "But if you want to get out, you have to finish what you started." "Finish what?" Nick took a step forward, but the boy stepped back. "A test. This is all a test. Only one of you can leave." With these words, the boy suddenly ran to one of the doors. Nick rushed after him, but it slammed shut right in his face. "Damn it!" he swore, slamming on the door. "Stop, Nick, it's useless." Cassie stopped him. "He showed us something. We need to understand what this means." They started rummaging through the documents until Jordan found the school's plan. He pointed to the underground level. "There's something here," he said. "Some kind of zone marked as Zone B. We have to go there," Cassie said firmly. "It's our only hope of finding Liam and finding out the truth." They headed for the stairs leading down, not even suspecting that someone was watching their every step. As they descended the stairs to the basement, they felt the air getting heavier, as if the walls were pressing down on them with their history. Nick walked ahead with a pipe in his hand, his muscles tense and his eyes constantly scanning the dark corners. It was cold below, and their every step echoed through the concrete space. When they reached the metal door marked Area B, Staff Only, Nick stopped and looked back at the others. "Are you ready?" he asked. Cassie nodded, though her hands were visibly shaking. Jordan didn't say anything, just looked at the door as the last barrier they had to overcome. Nick pushed the door open, and it gave way with a terrible creak. Beyond it was a long corridor with rusty lamps that flickered, creating an oppressive atmosphere. They walked past several rooms until they came across one with broken windows. There were shards of glass on the floor, and a faint smell of rot came from inside. "There was something here," Cassie whispered, pointing to the pieces of rope on the walls. "It looks like an interrogation room or observation room," Jordan added quietly. There was another folder on the table with "Closed" written on it in big red letters. "Transferring to the central facility is not possible." Cassie opened it and began to read. The reports described how a group of students who participated in the experiments became aggressive and began to exhibit unusual behavior. One of the students, Zach, turned out to be unstable. He was placed in isolation, but due to a technical malfunction, he was able to escape. Then there were chaotic recordings of attempts to evacuate staff. "It's because of him," Jordan whispered. "Zach caused havoc. And he's still here," Cassie added, lowering the folder. "He did all this." "No, that's not true," Nick said, shaking his head. "It's too easy. He was a child. How could a child have planned something like this?" At that moment, a metallic clang sounded behind them. They turned around and saw a man in dirty clothes with a knife in his hands. His face was distorted, his eyes looked with insane confidence. "You've come to the wrong place," he whispered, smiling. It was Zach. Nick lunged at him with a pipe, but Zach dodged with frightening ease, and then stabbed Nick in the side with a knife. Nick fell to the ground, writhing in pain. Cassie screamed, but Jordan grabbed her arm and pulled her away. "Let's run." "Stop it," he shouted. They ran down the corridor, hearing heavy footsteps and hoarse laughter behind them. The corridor led them to another door, which, as it turned out, was locked. "Damn it!" Jordan swore, turning around. Zach was approaching, his steps measured, as if he was enjoying their fear. "I've been waiting for you," he said, licking his lips. "All these years I've been waiting for someone to come back. To finish what you started. You. Were you part of the experiment?" Cassie asked in a trembling voice, pressing herself against the wall. Zach paused for a moment, his face serious. "I was not part of the experiment. I was his target." And in that moment, Cassie understood. It was all a mistake. They didn't find the documents and stumbled upon Zach. Zach found them. He left clues, he lured them here. They became part of his game, just as he had once been part of an experiment. "We missed it from the beginning," Cassie whispered, realizing they had no control over anything. Zach raised the knife, his face twisted into a creepy smile. "You came here voluntarily. You are mine now." With that, the light in the hallway went out, and their screams were drowned out by silence.